22 to 25, single, working a lot. Maybe you have roommates, maybe you have enough money not to, but either way, whether you have roommates or not, you're going to enjoy the city at almost the same level of someone who's a millionaire. The part that becomes difficult, where the expenses of the city goes up exponentially, is not so much when you get married, but it's like when you decide, like, can we have a kid? And if we have a kid, where can we stay? Even Democrats acknowledge this, like in abundance, that red states have just like less onerous regulations. And if you go down that list of different markets, every single one of those has been like a top 10 market of the largest home builders in the United States. So like D.R. Horton is still building homes for like $250,000 brand new in Houston, Dallas, and Austin, which is far more appealing to someone who's having a child than LA and San Francisco, where there is no product like that exists.
Think about Detroit. You know, it hit this decline of the auto industry. It really wasn't able to pull out of it. You don't know really what a city's made of or a place is made of till it's been through multiple cycles. Like New York has been down and it's come back, down and it's come back. Like, we won't know Carmel's long-term future until probably 25 years from now. What we can see is, did we navigate successfully to maturity? Did we get through it? Or did something go wrong? Did we become a retirement community? Did we lose all our kids? Did we fall behind financially? Those are the kinds of things that affect cities.
I'm joined today on the New Founding podcast by two guests. Really, I'm hoping to spark a duel between the two of them. We have, on the one hand, the expert on small town life in America. We have also with us the expert on sort of urban life, and I'll introduce both of them individually, or life in cities. First, we have Aaron Renn. So, Aaron, you're a writer, thinker, speaker, focused on Christian culture. New York Times described you as a kind of a Malcolm Gladwell for conservative Christianity. In your own life, you know, you were previously a partner at Accenture, a major consulting firm, and you pivoted more towards this focus on sort of the cultural questions and Christianity. You live in small town, sort of Carmel, Indiana.
Suburban. Let's just say, not really small town. We have 100,000 people.
Yes. So 100,000 people, and
large high school.
Yeah, very large high school.
And also on a personal note, your work, I think, has been very influential on sort of just conversations that you hear in the broader conservative Christian ecosystem. You'll hear people, at fellowship hour after church, or just in casual conversation, using many of the terms and ideas that you've presented, whether in Negative World or others. So I'm very, very glad to have you here. We also have with us Bobby Fijan, co-founder of the American Housing Corporation. You're building nice row homes in urban areas that actually work for families. You have a large profile on X. Like Donald J. Trump, you graduated from the Wharton School of Business, and you were recently on the American Moment podcast, which I saw was very well received. A lot of really interesting stuff presented there. We'll try not to rehash all the stuff that was said there. We'll talk about some other things as well. And the Daily Mail also last year called you an expert on this specific topic. So we are really bringing the expert minds together. So I actually want to start with a graph, and I'll insert this over on the video form of the podcast. But Bobby, you posted this graph. Elon actually quote tweeted it, so it went a little bit viral, and it was major metros in America from 2005 to 2024, the shift in the number of children under 5 who lived there. And I'll read just a few points of data, and then I want you to talk us through what's actually happening there. So from 2005 to 2024, cities such as Austin, Orlando, Raleigh, Charlotte, Dallas, they had an increase in the number of children under 5. Was 80 to 100% increase. But on the other hand, Chicago, Boston, New York, LA, San Francisco had a decrease, right? 30 to 40% decrease in that period in the number of children. So explain to us what's happening there.
Well, part of the explanation is very simple, of just like, those are the same cities that also have lost domestic migration in the United States. And the fertility rate over the last 20 years has also been declining. So on one part, it's just fairly simple of like, fewer people, lower fertility rate, many fewer children. And as I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, one thing that is particularly challenging about raising children in any environment, suburbs, rural or city, is raising them around other people. So I would say that the children being in an area where there are other children is something that it gets dramatically harder the fewer there are. And on the plus side, easier for every like marginal child that does arrive. I think the important thing to stress about that is like, it was in fact the metros. So it's not evenly distributed, and you will see in those some different areas. Like I think it came out recently that there are more school closures planned for Houston's ISD. So there are circumstances where a lot of different people moved to an area, and yet parts of the city still ended up losing school-age children.
I don't want the conversation to fixate too much on red, blue political questions, but it's actually sort of, you immediately notice that the list of cities where there was that increase was actually all in red states.
Sure.
And the list of cities that had the decrease was uniformly blue states.
Yep.
So again, like, how do you think about that dimension as well? Is there something about that suite of policies? Is it something about maybe the COVID era or something like that? That sort of, people talk about the big sort as well, where people sort of began to move in different directions. Perhaps certain families moved out of these blue cities and blue states. Is that also something going on here?
Well, I mean, there's online elsewhere, there's the housing theory of everything. And I think this also sort of fit into that too. So whether it is, clearly, I mean, even Democrats acknowledge this, like in abundance, that red states have just like less onerous regulations. And if you go down that list of different markets, every single one of those has been like a top 10 market of the largest home builders in the United States. So like D.R. Horton is still building homes for like $250,000 brand new in Houston, Dallas, and Austin, which is far more appealing to someone who's having a child than LA and San Francisco, where there is no product like that exists that's new.
Aaron, I want to bring you in here in a second, but I have one last follow-up question here. I just want to ask, like, very simply, let's say that first cohort with the big increase in the number of people, like, how big is the gap in housing costs, or costs to build, let's say, in a place like Austin versus a place like LA? And here I'm thinking specifically like material costs and regulations and things like that. Like, how should we think about how big that disparity is?
The cost of construction is at least, it all depends on the different thing you're building, but it's 200 to 300% difference.
Is that big?
Well, so that's partly because the way that we build construction, for both homes and apartments is extremely labor intensive. So these costs sort of pile on each other. So the higher the rents are, the higher the labor costs are, and therefore like the more it costs to build. So most of, at least half of the cost of construction of a home is labor.
So Aaron, you currently live in Carmel, Indiana. I was corrected. I called it a small town. I apologize. So talk me through a little bit about what you've seen there in terms of sort of population flows, perhaps people moving. And then I'm also curious, where else have you lived before? And what have you seen across sort of different places you lived in your life?
Yeah, well, I grew up in rural southern Indiana, so I literally am from a small town. I grew up 4 miles outside of a town of fewer than 100 people. So we had a 4-way stop, and that was basically it. In the town, went to Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana, then moved to Chicago, and actually more known as a guy who writes about cities, believe it or not. My old nom de plume was the urbanophile, Phile, the lover of cities. Also lived in New York City, so I spent most of my adult life living in big cities. I came back to Indiana about 6 years ago, and Carmel is kind of a business professional class suburb directly north of Indianapolis. You could think of it as maybe similar to like a Frisco, Plano kind of thing. And what happens with a lot of these places is, there's a life cycle to a town or a neighborhood. So a suburb is new. Go back to the original Levitt towns in the 40s and 50s. You're building brand new suburbs, and who's buying the homes? Young families with kids. They all move out there. You're building schools. Everything's overcrowded. They're meeting in trailers, that sort of thing. And so it attracts sort of initially a kind of a monolithic demographic in a suburb or an area. And then what happens is eventually a couple things start happening. One is you start to finish building up all the land. So now you're kind of full. You're not like converting a cornfield or an empty field into a big subdivision. You've mostly filled up all the land. Carmel is starting to get to that point where we've developed most of our land. Secondly, people's kids graduate from high school, they go off to college, but mom and dad don't leave. Mom and dad stay there. Maybe eventually they retire to Florida or Arizona or someplace like that. Or maybe they move downtown into a condo to like be in the action now that they're empty nesters. But a lot of times the parents just continue living in the same old house they raised the kids in, or maybe they downsize in the community. So what that means is the number of households with kids is actually starts declining once a suburb or a city reaches maturity, because, basically originally almost every house had a family with kids in it. Then at some point, some of those are occupied by people who already raised their kids. And also as the amenities, as they grow, the amenities typically get better. Eventually the prices go up, which has happened in Carmel. Prices have gone up a lot. It's less of a middle class. It's now upper middle class. It's harder for younger families to buy in. And so the kind of combination of we're now full in terms of land, people who raise their kids are sticking around, and that housing is not turning over to young families, and the price is going up, tends to send the number of students into decline. They have to start closing schools, or your schools are down, et cetera. Carmel's hanging tough. We're pretty much sort of near essentially as our peak, but they're projecting that we're going to actually have a, steady declines in the number of students in our district for that sort of reason.
When you think about let's say some sort of a suburban development or even a small town, right? I think most people actually imagine, or people who have not, let's say, thought very deeply about the subject often imagine that they are somewhat static, that sort of like, young families kind of come in for a period of time, go, and then new young families come in, and that there isn't necessarily like a life cycle of a region. So I guess my question is, to what extent are towns in America, are they, one, sort of static? Two, are they sort of cyclical? Do they sort of go through these phases, or like classical stages of sort of like a rise, decline, and sort of a resurgence? Or is there sort of a definitive beginning and end? And maybe a good analogy here would be, sort of all lakes sort of proceed towards becoming a marsh. Like this is sort of generally speaking, they get like more and more shallow, they get more and more plants and such sort of decompose within them, and they head in that direction. So how do you think about towns and cities? Like which of those three different options is sort of what you see when you look across them? Well,
one thing we see this with regions, but we see this with a lot of towns. So I kind of mentioned the demographic life cycle of children, but part of it is, okay, the suburb is new, the neighborhood is new. Bobby's row homes are brand new, right? Okay. So it's brand new, meaning it's exactly what the market wants right now. Everything's perfect. You don't have any of these old unfunded pension liabilities and all that stuff. And like, wow, you're here. We have the brand new, remember back in the day, it was a new mall. We just built this amazing new mall. Everything's great stores. Fast forward 30 years. The houses are now old. They need a lot of maintenance. The kitchens look dated. Styles have changed. We're not doing strip malls anymore. We're doing power centers. Now we're doing lifestyle centers. Now we're doing this sort of thing. So all your old commercial space is obsolete. Now our streets need to be rebuilt, not just built. Now we kick the can down the road on our pensions. And so eventually, it's sort of like China. China looks great right now because they built all this stuff and it's brand new. Well, we're struggling with stuff that's old. And so the issue with the life cycle comes in is when any community, a city, a town, a neighborhood, it gets old, and it now has to essentially recreate itself. It has to essentially get through the reconstruction of its infrastructure. This is where a lot of places fail. And even a lot of inner ring suburbs in America essentially kind of went into big decline. And once you start going into decline, it's very difficult to pull out of it. And so that's a transition. The transition to maturity, it really hits it hits businesses too. It's like, this new fast food chain, they're taking over the country. They're opening locations like crazy, or even a company like Home Depot are opening, but then you saturate the market. And like now you're not growing through just adding locations anymore. All of a sudden, that's a lot. These kinds of companies tend to kind of have to wander in the wilderness for a while. And a lot of them then fail. They go into decline. So this happens with regions. Think about Detroit. It hit this decline of the auto industry. It really wasn't able to pull out of it. You don't know really what a city's made of or a place is made of till it's been through multiple cycles. Like New York has been down and it's come back, down and it's come back. We can see that happen. you really won't know. Like, we won't know Carmel's long-term future until probably 25 years from now. What we can see is, did we navigate successfully to maturity? Did we get through it? Or did something go wrong? Did we become a retirement community? Did we lose all our kids? Did we fall behind financially? Those are the kinds of things that affect cities and lifestyle.
What's really interesting to me about both of you actually is that this conversation that we're having right now, at least over the past decade, it seems like the center of it was a sort of new urban people who are interested in urban planning, urbanism, tended to be very left-wing people. Like there was so much conversation related to this on Reddit in 2017 or something like that. And then it sort of trickled into like the mainstream media and other places. And you sort of saw on college campus as well, some of the students who were, again, sort of definitely more on the left-wing side of things cared the most about the college town being very walkable and things like this. So I guess one question I have is let's say for conservatives or people who are conservative Christians and such, I guess one question would be, where should they basically choose to live even today? So many of them I think are also considering some of these same sorts of questions, maybe don't have as much of they're not as familiar with as much of the language, but you have basically a series of options. Like you can go into the city, pursue like the economic opportunity there. You could move to the nice sort of suburbs or small town areas where maybe it's a little quieter, a little safer, these sorts of things. And then there is also like the rural homestead retreat. So I'm curious for both of you, like what should conservatives, where should we go? What should we do? What should we care about?
I think it's similar to like advice that I gave. Like I had a decent number of interns and a few like analysts like come through, and everyone always asks a similar question of like, where do you sort of start your career? What's the best place to start your career? And like invariably the answer is like, it may not be nice, but like if you go do your 2 years at a bank or a consulting firm, like that is a great place to start. They do a really good job of working you like crazy. Like you meet a lot of other like young, ambitious people. You fly around the world, you learn different stuff, but at minimum you come out and you've been trained. So I think I would say like there's a similar either decision or non-decision among anyone who is ambitious, whether they're Christian, liberal, whatever. I think like the city are that natural point. It would be, I think, very difficult for someone who is 18 years old to say, I'm going to go build my life in somewhere rural. They'd probably need to be dedicated to being in some sort of trade and be incredibly entrepreneurial. But for almost everyone else, like I would say, and if you can do that, more power to you. That would require an unbelievable amount of probably access to capital, but like will and dedication to that lifestyle. But for most other people, what the city represents is opportunity, ambition, and a lifestyle that at minimum definitely makes sense for like when you're 22 to 24, 22 to 25. And after that point, then there can be a change. You have to make enough money. You have to find someone. Maybe your family lives in the city, maybe they don't. I think like that's when sort of the decision comes. But for everyone who's 22, I would say like go to the city, like because it's where the opportunities are.
The specter sort of lingering over this conversation though is that we've lost the cities, right? This is sort of the starting point, at least in a political sense.
Sure.
So.
Well, I guess I'd say, yeah. I don't think that matters that much when you're 22. Like,
that's
you should
right,
just
yeah.
be working all the time anyway.
Right.
So, like, it's sort of like, it's similar. Like, someone can come up with all these different ideas of what they're going to do with an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to hire this, I'm going to hire from here, I'm going to hire there. It's like, if you are thinking about those things when you're 22, that is just not appropriate. Or else you're a unique one-of-one individual who can and should go do that. But for 99% of the people, right, don't do that.
Where did you both go after college?
No, I went to Chicago and lived on the north side of Chicago. And so it's like, that's what I did. It was transformational for me. Like for a lot of people, college is this period of like self-discovery and growth and expanded horizons and personal transformation. It was not that for me. But when I moved to Chicago, it was that transformational experience to me. I fell in love with cities like only someone from a town of 29 people can. And I don't hate rural areas by any means. I still like the area where I grew up. But it was really, really, really transformative in terms of that. And also you got to think about the city that you do choose to move to too. So Chicago's sort of the capital of the Midwest. And so there's going to be much greater opportunities in Chicago than there are in, say, Indianapolis, where I live now, which is, it's a tertiary market. Let's be clear. Where are we now? We're in Dallas. Dallas is like a big opportunity market in the heartland. The top opportunity at the top of the economy is disproportionately on the coast. It's in New York. It's in San Francisco. It's in places like that. So you have to think about where you're going and what the opportunity is there. But for me personally, I went to the city. It's where I found a job. I don't want to think there was nothing strategic to it. Candidly, I didn't know anything about anything at that point. I was like J.D. Vance, spitting out his sparkling water the first time. Yeah, like, what are all these like silverware doing at my table? That's kind of what I was. I remember when I went to Chicago for a job interview, I flew to O'Hare Airport, and I didn't know how to take a taxi. I tried to grab at a taxi that someone had just dropped somebody off at the departures level. He's like, no, you can't do this. You got to go down here. Like, I didn't know how anything worked. And so, but going to Chicago, like, you learn a little bit more about how the world works, and a lot more. You're going to get so much more exposure to so much more in these places. And of course, they're much more culturally dynamic. There's a lot more going on. Chicago had a great music scene. And, I got to see all these bands like Wilco and things when they were playing in tiny little things. And, obviously the art museums, there's a lot there. So when you're not working all the time, so, you work all the time, some of the time, I hope. But yeah, there's more to do there. It's interesting. You're meeting people your own age, people are in your own wavelength. And so, yeah, that's what I did.
Bobby, what about you?
So, the slight complication is I met my wife when I was a super senior at school. My wife was a freshman, and we got married in between her sophomore and junior year. So we stayed in Philadelphia, which I would say is, and there's another interesting dynamic about Philadelphia elsewhere. So like, I'd say I always thought that I was going to move to New York and go work for a bank or something like that. But then in meeting and marrying a girl who was going to be in Philadelphia, we thought about moving to Chicago. We thought about her graduating early and moving to New York. And then it just didn't happen that way. And I ended up starting a company in Philadelphia. So we stayed in Philadelphia a long time. We found a great church, through that experience. But, Philadelphia has a bunch of has the really interesting dynamic of being an incredibly strong magnet of like young people. I mean, the University of Pennsylvania is quite a large portion of it. There's a hospital at the University of Pennsylvania. I think like 1 in 6 medical professionals like goes through Philadelphia for either residency or for fellowship. But like other, frankly, tertiary markets, it doesn't have enough people to keep them. Like I had a number of friends, and our church was littered with them. We had a number of people who had come through 10th Presbyterian Church. Yeah. Who are getting their MBA or going through law school. And lawyers could find jobs in Philadelphia if they wanted to. But we had several friends who wanted to stay in Philadelphia and were unable to because there was just no financial services market to speak of. There were offices of McKinsey and Bain and BCG there, but they weren't particularly large, and they weren't the flagship sort of companies who worked on. Anyway, it's an interesting dynamic. Similar, like I'd say I fell in love with the city by living in Philadelphia, which I'd say the advantage of Center City, Philadelphia is that it is the size of a neighborhood in New York City. So everything that is in New York is compressed into this very small part of Philadelphia. So you can walk from the few high rises that go up, like the Comcast Tower, and 8 blocks away, one of our really good friends and mentors who'd lived in the city for a long time had this like beautiful little row home, which was, I think at that time, probably still maybe only over a little over $500,000. Okay. So it's a very affordable city, partly because its economy is Eds and Meds and Comcast.
Right. So it's still the case. It's still the case that for a young person, especially if they're ambitious, that they graduate from college and going to a big American city, probably even a coastal city, if not maybe a place like Chicago, maybe Dallas, is the right move. But I think what we, where I want to maybe move this is that, and what we saw in the data and the graph that you posted is that they sort of struggle at the point of maybe that individual gets married, maybe they do have a first child, and then there's sort of this, it becomes almost a toxic place maybe for families to thrive, or big families to thrive in some of these ecosystems, maybe especially these coastal or blue cities. So like what specifically, what is the issue there, and then how do we actually solve that?
Well, I'd say that decision is the core business point that my company exists to solve. So I would say like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, like these elite, or London, these elite places to live are phenomenal. Like I said, when you're 22 to 25, single, working a lot, maybe you have roommates, maybe you have enough money not to, but either way, whether you have roommates or not, you're going to enjoy the city at almost the same level of someone who's a millionaire, right? And that's one of the things I actually like about the city, of like where you live honestly doesn't matter that much, because you're going out to eat at the same places. You're going to the same like happy hour specials. The part that becomes difficult, where the expenses of the city goes up exponentially, is not so much when you get married, but it's like when you decide, like, can we have a kid? And if we have a kid, where can we stay? So where you will see enormous price differences, even within the city, is like in New York, it'll be, can you live within the specific public school catchment? Like in the Upper West Side, there are individual blocks that are, like 10, 20% more than other ones, because they are slotted to very specific public schools. Because the other thing that makes it very difficult, which is related to like sort of the services of the city, is I'd say there are a decent number of people who, I mean, among the upper middle class, can afford to live in New York, or these different cities, trading space for, location. But if the school doesn't work, there aren't that many people who can afford. I have a friend who's lived in the Upper West Side for a long time, and he's like, we had such a wonderful experience, incredibly walkable neighborhood, and they lived like at 90th and Central Park West, and they sent their kids to Trinity, and their entire life was like this incredible, like wonderful walkable area. I think, but Trinity costs like $75,000 a year for school, so you can do it. It's just incredibly expensive. So I would say like it's mostly like a cost thing, and then what happens is, and then because it's extremely cost driven, then you just have a huge drop off of the number of people who can afford it, and then everything sort of crumbles after that.
I mean, Aaron, you lived in New York City for a period of time. What was that
Our
like?
son was born in Manhattan. We walked home from the hospital.
That's amazing.
We took him home in a stroller on foot from the hospital to the Upper West Side, and it was amazing. And the Upper West Side is it's my favorite neighborhood in the whole world.
Mine too.
And but it's one of these things where, like, it was a massive Strollerville neighborhood. They used to call these neighborhoods strollers. Huge numbers of kids on the Upper West Side.
What year was this?
This was, my son was born in like 2017.
Okay.
And basically, and it's probably even somewhat like that still today. The key is people would ask, okay, Aaron, are you and Katie planning to stay or leave? And I would always say, well, we have no plans to leave. But I look around my neighborhood and I see kids everywhere, and 95% of them are 5 or under. So odds are we're going to turn it into a statistic.
Yeah.
And so when you have little kids that are not in school, they don't cost that much money.
That's right.
They don't need that much space. It's you can do a lot with them. You can even carry your stroller up and down a flight of stairs, which we used to do, and things like that. But when you hit the school situation, then a place like New York, private schools are just off the charts expensive. And so it becomes, it's like a full-time job navigating, getting into schools and things like that. A huge topic of conversation there. And so I think that poses a lot of kind of burdens on people. And the other thing about New York, and this is something else, is it's an extremely high churn market. And so this was like a problem with, like, so, my wife's getting to know like at church, the other moms of young kids, they're having that, and then poof, moved to South Carolina. And you rapidly learn in New York not to overinvest in relationships because they're so transient. And so you end up in an environment in which there's high population churn, particularly of families, particularly of young people. And the people who tend to stick around for the long term are very wealthy. And they're just living in a different world than you are, and you're probably not hanging out with them, right? And so I would say, like 5 years after we left, we were back in New York over the summer, went back to our old church, which we loved. Still never found a place we loved as much as our church in New York. It's still awesome. But I say in 5 years, it's 85%.
You didn't recognize anybody.
I recognize some people, but like it's like 85% new people. And and the ones that are still there, who were there before, are they're either like retiree age people, or they're extremely wealthy people who are probably like spending all the time between all their different homes every which way. And which the reality is you're just not going to be like their good buddies, most likely. And so it becomes difficult. I think there's a lot of things quite apart from the housing and schooling and the transients of some of these places. Whereas even in downtown Indianapolis, in a city, it's a different environment. You know, my wife's church that she was at for a long time there was founded in the 90s. There's still lots of people who were there as founding families who are still there. There's tremendous stability of people. You can maintain relationships there. And so that's one thing you end up with the elite cities, the constant churn of people, the dynamism. You have to, if you're going to stay there for long term, you have to be the kind of person who's comfortable with that kind of churn.
I think the focus on the churn is such an incredible part, right? We saw that in our church too. And what that ends up doing once that idea gets in the water is everyone starts getting that countdown clock in their mind. Yeah. And it causes some people to either like invest less, right? So the extreme example is for Wharton graduate students, right? Like, we know we're going to be here for 2 years. We know we're not getting a job here. I know I'm getting an internship that first summer. So like, if I don't go to church every week, not that big of a deal. Or if I don't get involved in this different thing, something else. But I would say there was an enormous difference between the way that MBA students treated church and their community and even medical residents or fellows did, because they knew like there's a decent chance that you might get a job at a hospital. You could be here for a long time, and you're going to be here for at least 4 years, and then maybe another 2 for fellowship residency. So we're talking about something that's long enough where you might as well invest. But when you start getting down to that churn of like 2-3 years, someone says like, I'm here, I'm going to consume the city. This is nice. I'll enjoy it. But this is just a way station, right? Like maybe I'm going to move to Connecticut or Bergen County, or maybe I'm going to move back home, or I'm going to go get that, sweet CFO job for the industrials in Indianapolis or whatever it is. But it has the downstream effect of just like causing less of an investment in community among those different members. Yeah,
that was actually one thing. My church in New York, people would come there and they would rave about how awesome the community was at that church. And I thought, well, this seems like pretty normal. Like, I don't think, it's like, wasn't bad. It's like, this is good, but like, this is like normal church. But then I realized normal church is extremely unusual in a place like New York, where, it's very rare to have it. So having a place that's got like normal community, it really was kind of a unique place, I think, in a lot of ways. And, but yeah, those elite cities are there. Chicago is a much more stable market than New York. I think it really is some of these coastal cities. Washington's probably very similar in some ways. These places, the churn is something else to deal with.
Bobby, you mentioned in some posts online the idea of the importance of an extra room. Sure. And you've also talked a lot about floor plans. And actually, this relates to something you were saying, Aaron, which is the youngest children, right? Babies are very small. Right. They don't take a lot of space. They are loud. Right. it's worth noting at times. And so talk me through like what is like the floor plan, the layout of the actual living space itself? Like what's sort of the importance there, and talk us through that.
Well, no, babies are very small, but what they need is like a dark room that has a door. Right. That's really what they need. So like, if you talk to any family who's had, whether they're even if they're incredibly wealthy, almost all of them will have put like an infant in a bathroom, a closet, built out an extra room, or do something like that. Everyone figures out how to make like individual small space work. So, to then come back around to answer your question specifically, like, I spent about like a little more than 12 months and did a study with like the Institute for Family Studies, all to sort of prove, I think with like a 6,000 person survey, that yes, in fact, families want an extra room in a given fixed amount of square footage. And I'd say like where some neighborhoods, like the Upper West Side, and I guess this is definitely not the case in newer ones, which is again the problem my company's trying to start. But in old, especially pre-war buildings, you will find a lot more units that have more bedrooms, smaller bedrooms. If they have a closet, it's going to be smaller in the room, and the limited space they have is going to be allocated towards a small kitchen, might be a galley, all towards like the living room, and it like works. Like, I mean, my sister has lived in the Upper West Side now for over a decade. She has 3 kids in a very small little place. They make it work partly because her small group of her friends has been around for nearly that long. So for her to give that up and go to somewhere else, which, I hope I mean, they'll make their own decision for their family, but like would be an enormous thing to sacrifice. It's a huge benefit they have there. So I'd say to come back to answer the question of like, what is it that's good for a family? Some of it depends on how dense an area is. Like small isn't better for its own sake. Like when you're in the suburbs, there's no reason for the house to be smaller than it needs to be. The additional cost to build like something slightly larger in the suburbs is pretty minimal, which is one of the reasons why like in the 80s and 90s, we saw the rise in the McMansion, because you might as well. The yard is there, so just add on an extra office, playroom, basement, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But in the city or in areas where the square feet are precious, or it's like very expensive for that additional marginal room, that's where I'd say designing smaller rooms really makes sense. And that's where the current, I'd say, layout of apartment floor plans has become dominated by essentially designing high rises and new units for roommates to be split.
But I don't know what you found in your suburb. New York is interesting. At least it used to be. Usually like your price per bedroom like goes down as the number of bedrooms goes up in terms of rent. It's actually the opposite in if you want to get a 3-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, it's like massive. There's so few of them that they're massively in demand. Well,
and a lot of them came like because someone bought a new unit and combined it with something else. Like they don't build them. It's very complicated.
Yeah. So it's like it's actually becomes. It's not just like, oh, I'll get this place. So like thinking about like that demand for those bedrooms is so high.
Yes.
That you'll actually willing to pay a super premium just to get them.
Yeah. So going one sort of level bigger than, let's say, the floor plan that you're in. Yeah. You think about your street, your block, your neighborhood, and there's this interesting tension, which is that proximity can either be a huge advantage or it can be a total disaster, depending on sort of the level of trust and sort of what it is that is like proximal or not to you. So a good example here, actually this relates to the transience question, would be if you were living in a very high trust community where you could sort of rely on the various different people around you, having actually, let's say, a number of other families right through the wall from you actually becomes an advantage. You need to run to the store, whatever it is. You could sort of look after the baby for a minute, or perhaps, and you could leave any number of just friends for your children to play with as well. It's a tremendous advantage. But of course, if you can't rely on who's on the other side of the wall, anything could happen, right? And so the question of, and this is actually, I think the new urbanism left-wing people get wrong, is that they think that just by, let's say creating more walkable environments, just by producing more row homes, it's going to create this sort of paradise. And of course, it's like a utopian vision. It's just not true. It's just not actually how it actually works. And I want to relate it to the transience point, which is that what's increasingly common is for young people is they do in fact move for college, generally away from, they're sort of moving further and further. More people are going to college, more people are sort of moving away, let's say after high school, just a single move there. Then you generally move again to some sort of a city. And what I noticed is in general amongst, let's say, Gen Z people, is they often sort of move to a different city than, let's say, even sort of the suburb that they grew in or up in, something like that. But there's also like 2 or 3 more moves that tend to happen, right? So it's like maybe you go to consulting for a year or 2, or investment banking for a year or 2, and then you exit to private equity, or you go to business school or whatever else. And then there's a sort of a further move on sort of the back, and 1 or 2 more after that. And generally speaking, that sort of group of people tend to be like fairly reliable people, decent neighbors, whatever else. But because of all of this movement, people are not particularly rooted. They really don't know who the people around them are, or even the people in their church, or things like this. And so I guess really actually what I want to bring this back to the question of Carmel, Indiana. This is sort of a much longer conversation. And the question of like, I think what maybe suspect what makes Carmel rich is actually, it has something to do with the trust, but then there's also things about the layout. And there are other elements too. So I'm curious to hear like what is working in Carmel, Indiana? What is driving that?
Carmel's an interesting mix. It is the place that, when you hire someone from out of town, or, somebody gets transferred to the Indianapolis market, they'd say you should look there and buy a house. So we do have a lot of newcomers to the community, a lot of people who would be like the Reloville. Yeah. In a sense, but we also have a lot of people who are from the area and have been there a long time. So it's a good mix. I think you always want to have a mix of sort of rootedness and dynamism. if you don't have enough new blood, if you don't have enough change, everything calcifies and becomes not good. But if it's constant churn and constant new people, they always complain about Austin, Texas. It's losing its soul. You feel like you're losing your soul. You're becoming a soulless place where it's just like all people who are transients coming through there. I think we've got a nice mix. It is sort of, it is more affluent. It is high trust. The rules are sort of enforced there. And it is kind of a superpower in a sense, because you can have nice things there. I was in Vermont, actually, Manchester, Vermont, a few years ago, and we went to the playground. This is like a great example. It's like this, they have a sandbox in this playground with all these really nice toys in it, just like sitting there for people to play with. And it's like, what are you, like, of course, being from cities, where like in Chicago, like every door in my building, you could see where somebody had tried to jimmy it open. It's just like, you can just leave stuff sitting out and nobody takes it. And it really is kind of crazy. And it's like, if you're actually going on vacation, you can call the police and tell them, and they'll actually on a daily basis come by your house and make sure like nothing's going on there. It really is good. And it does allow, I think it does, we have HOAs and all that stuff in the really regulated environments that people like. So we have some of that product, but we also have sort of, we've built up a lot of mixed use areas, walkable areas, non-HOA areas like the one I live in, and you literally can walk to places. And so we live we're in a suburb, but we walk to school, we walk to the library, walk to the coffee shop, walk to the restaurant, walk to the ice cream place. We're able to do a lot. And one of the things that I think that I love about it is we're a one-car family. And so, when you don't have to have two cars and you can only have one car, like that's a massive savings in terms of that. And so I like being able to do that. And oh, by the way, I have a 2-car garage. It's nice that our garage can actually put stuff in there, like instead of like just 2 cars and wouldn't have a lot of room. So I think there is that thing. People don't necessarily want, I think a lot of people don't want to live in like a truly urban environment. They want to have a house with a yard. Great. But they also want to have, the ability to get on a bicycle and ride around. They want to be able to go jogging. They want to have sidewalks. They want to have nice parks and playgrounds. They want to have an area they can go, a little downtown, just like the downtown of a small town, that all the people from the surrounding farms, they come in there. And, it used to be, back when these small towns were the center of public life, you could come, everything's active. And so I think that is something that we certainly see more of, is urban elements coming into these places. And part of it is enabled. I don't know if it's even a trust issue. It's like a public order issue in a sense that the rules are actually enforced. That's one of the things that you will find is if you come to my county and start violating the law, then you're going to get arrested and you're probably going to get prosecuted. Now, of course, there's a lot of things that are obnoxious that are not illegal, but like it is a different environment. It is a very different environment when you see that, and just little things that like our city like goes out regularly picking up trash along all the roads. It's like the idea that like the roads, if there's a bunch of trash on the side of the road, people are going to throw trash out their window. They're going to litter. You got to keep it, when you keep it clean, when you keep all that stuff, it like people see it, it affects. It's just all the broken window studies that people have done in like the Netherlands and places get to this. So I think there is that sense of which maintaining order and things like that is really, really right. It's like, oh, if there's some graffiti, which we don't get graffiti, but if somebody does it, it's cleaned off immediately. Stuff like that counts for a lot in like making something feel totally, completely safe.
No, high trust is possible when there is place with order. So like you need order, which is why I think like, I'd still say like, living downtown in 2019 was to me like one of the apex. It was like a beautiful moment of the city. Like everyone that I know who had kids down there, it was a great time. And then 2020 happened, and there was COVID, and then there was a bunch of cities decided to stop enforcing these different laws, which to your point, I'd say like, the thing that density requires, it requires higher levels of like public order, higher levels of enforcing crimes. Where my wife is from, in East Texas, people can kind of do whatever they want. Now, there isn't disorder because it's East Texas and people are still like generally like neighborly, so to speak, but that it does there aren't those requirements on the city in order to make that run. I mean, I think it's been well established that all the parts of decline in New York were also associated with times like there was significant increases in crime or reduced policing.
Yeah, I think it probably also you think about East Texas. I mean, there are different ideas of standards. So you come to Carmel, there's going to be a high standard of like keeping your yard.
Yep.
Whereas in East Texas, if you've got like a car on blocks in your front yard, that's where I grew up.
Right.
It's like you would drive around down there and say, this looks very junky. But this is just how people do. They're perfectly fine with it. Nobody has a problem with it. It's not viewed as disorder in the sense that like, oh, this area is like very sketchy. It's just like, no, this is just how we are here. And so you got to pick a place where like the public standards match what you want.
Exactly right.
But it's still the sort of there's still sort of kind of there's still kind of like rules of a sense. They're just different rules.
Yeah, I lived in DC for a period of time. I actually in a row house and probably in the sort of environment that many of us would actually sort of idealize from an architectural standpoint, right? It's like a Victorian era row house in like the DuPont Circle area. But what's so interesting is there's this like contradiction where like right on the corner there's a CVS and everything is locked up, and the DuPont Circle metro stop, probably 20% of people going through are jumping the turnstile, which is like I think the modern equivalent of the broken window theory. Essentially, like, there was no enforcement, and in many ways, while the architectural remains were still there, it lacked many of the elements of what you're describing in Carmel. And you mentioned your car for being able to do this sort of one car family type thing. And I think you've actually noted that Carmel perhaps has the most roundabouts of any sort of area of its approximate size. I think it was 150.
We have more than any other city in America. We have over 150, almost 160 roundabouts.
What's the significance of that, and what other characteristics like that do you think are meaningful?
Well, roundabouts are very big in Europe. And so we essentially replace all of our stoplights and all of our stop signs on arterial streets with roundabouts. We still have a handful of stoplights here or there, most of which are going to get taken out. And I like them because, where they function well, in the places that are appropriate for them, they're amazing because you don't have to stop. You don't get stopped at stoplights. You just drive through. And so a lot of things, there's like things compound. People say they're safer because unlike at a stoplight, there's no T-bone or head-on collisions. You have to slow down to go around this roundabout. So you're going to have a slower speed side swipe type incident. Unless, of course, the occasional 3 a.m. drunk driver just plows right through it. That does happen, but it's pretty rare. But what happens? When the power goes out, the thing still keeps working. You don't have the light blinking there. You're saving on the electricity. Once it's built, there's no more cost to maintain all of that. It's greener because there's less emissions, less people stopping. It's faster. There can be nicely landscaped, that sort of thing. And the other nice thing about it is because people aren't stopping, you don't get a lot of panhandlers. I mean, once you go south into the city of Indianapolis, like there's a panhandler at every single stoplight. So when there's no stoplights, the panhandlers have a tougher time. That's not.
So the rotary is the equivalent of. I mean, this is going to be
streets in Russian Hill. Yeah, right. Like there's few people who sleep on the sidewalks at Russian Hill because it rolls uphill.
Yeah. So I think that's there's something there's something to like how it works. It's just so nice. You just drive around the city from one side to the other, and maybe sometimes you just never stop. And it's like we're one of the rare places in the country that's been growing where traffic's better than it was 20 years ago. Like, it's just like, wow, this is amazing. You just drive around and, it's quite a contrast with other areas. Now, if you go into North Dallas, go to a place like Plano, okay? Plano is over twice as dense as Carmel in population. So we're a very low density city. And so when you get into the higher densities like Plano and where you have these like 6-lane divided highways, is every arterial is like a massive divided highway street. You can't put a roundabout there. The traffic volumes are too high. And so you really have to design it you have to have a lower density, lower volume streets for it to work, which is mostly what we have and it's truly amazing. It's truly amazing, kind of in my opinion. I get so frustrated everywhere I go, and I'm stopping at a stoplight, and I'm like, what is this? This is an insult to humanity.
One, also the 6-lane roads, whether it's arterial, no matter how fast the speed limit is, they're like, no pedestrian wants to walk across that, right? It completely severs one side of the street from the other, and so you end up with these maybe walkable shopping centers, but you're not going to have any pedestrian traffic back and forth. You have throttled your city or choked your city in from being into these different zones.
Yeah, and what a lot of suburbs are doing now, and even cities, is it's not just they're putting a sidewalk on the road. They put like an 8 to 10 foot wide multi-use path, so you can have bicycling, you can jogging. There's a lot of room to go there. Whereas a lot of times you'd have like the 5-foot sidewalk right next to the divided highway on some of the older stuff. I spent some time walking around Frisco on some of these streets, and it is not pleasant in the slightest. So it's like I say, there's so much more economic power in Dallas and North Dallas than where I live, but where I live is massively more humane, I would say.
You guys are both faithful Christians, and you both referenced actually the experience of being a part of a church in a major coastal, a metro area. What do you think? I guess reflect a little bit for me. I'm interested in what you think, sort of even more sociologically, about what is happening with, let's say, churches in New York City or in Chicago. We talked about transients. There are many other dimensions there. What did you notice going to church in some of these coastal cities?
The one thing I'd say about New York, and again, my experience in New York was in the 2010s. So this is my experience from a period of time, is that New York is actually the most religion-friendly big city in the country. And I've always, I thought it was a little strange.
Everybody always says the opposite. So yeah, explain it to us. Yeah.
I think it's, my theory is because it always had a large Jewish population. And there are a lot of modern Orthodox Jews who work in different industries there. And so they have to honor the Sabbath. They have kosher laws. Any event you go to in New York City, kosher food's going to be available there. So,
no one's going to schedule a closing for any of the high holidays, right? Those are just business holidays.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I think this idea that people have a religion and this religion, makes some obligation on it is you're Catholic and you get a big cross on your head on Ash Wednesday. It's great. Good Friday, of course, the markets are closed Good Friday, but Good Friday is basically a holiday in New York. We have more minor holidays that are celebrated there than anywhere else. And I think it is a sense you can be very religious and have a religious thing there, and people, it's okay. Now I do think, obviously you have to be willing to accept the kind of cultural conditions of New York, and that you're obviously not going to be able to run for mayor as a Christian nationalist or something like that. that sort of thing, you got to be willing to accept that there's other people there. The other thing is New York is in fact genuinely pluralistic. And I mean the Upper West Side, I live in the Upper West Side, it's one of the most famously liberal neighborhoods in the whole country, which it is. But, you could be hardcore conservative and live there. You're not going to have any problems. And in fact, you get to be talking to people and mention that you're a hardcore conservative, and they're not even going to blink. That's been my experience. They're this is New York. We got everybody here. It doesn't faze us. I mean, I'm sure things could get bad. I think places like Indianapolis are far more insufferable in terms of the hick libs, they call them.
Yes.
That are there. You're kind of a hick lib, and you're trying a lot harder because you're not in the center of the action. And it's sort of nobody in New York goes around saying, "Oh, did you know New York is a world-class city? We're a world-class city." They don't talk like that because obviously, that's nobody ever asks you why did you move to New York? That's a question that people. Because of course you wanted to come to New York as soon as you got, so there is a weirdness there that I think it's actually a very religious friendly city in a sense, compared to many other places. I think New England is a lot like rockier soil.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, can you reconcile this with some of your thinking when you've talked about sort of the shift from towards a negative world, especially with respect to Christianity? Sort of talk us through how you sort of reconcile all of that.
Yeah, well, I do think, again, I think with New York, as long as if you identify like as a Christian, or I'm a Christian, and even if you have like traditional beliefs, nobody's going to give you a hard time, probably. It's when you think that those should inform public policy there. And so I think New York, again, it is the most kind of open. I think other cities are more sort of, more hardcore, less tolerant, in a sense. I hear how intolerant San Francisco Bay Area is. I don't know enough about that personally, that like you can't like have a dissident thought, or you'll have, you'll get, you'll have your life destroyed there. So is this. But I do think we shifted into this negative world where sort of, especially in the woke era, there was this sort of hard left progressive cultural hegemony that came down, and like Christianity was basically viewed negatively, viewed as low status, may even be a better way. It's low status. It's potentially a threat to the new public moral order, the new civil religion. And so I think that can become uncomfortable for a lot of people, but maybe it's not as uncomfortable for people who always lived in a big city. I mean, if you'd lived in New York a long time, or San Francisco a long time, you probably never expected that it was going to be a Christian society, in the sense that someone in Dallas might expect it to be a Christian society. And so I think the cultural expectations may have been different in some of the big cities.
How much of that do you think in New York was a result of like the actual, positive influence of like Redeemer and Keller and that sort of stuff? Because he was, they've been working faithfully on that for a long time. Obviously, specifically up like in the Upper West Side.
Yeah.
It became much more respectable. And I'd say like, I certainly felt the effects of that also in Philadelphia too. Like everything you said about New York, I would generally ascribe to Philadelphia as well. But I guess like, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I wasn't around. The people that I knew who tended to be more publicly religious, again, were Jewish and Catholic, more so than evangelical, I would say.
Sure.
But potentially, certainly could have had a big. They were obviously big successful church there.
Sure. I think one of the things, Aaron, that you've written about and spoke about in the past is that there was this era of the dominance of the main lines, and so here I'm going to put words in your mouth. So correct anything that I say that's wrong. But the era of the dominance of the main lines, and there was sort of there was a respectability to it, and there was status that went alongside with it. And then we had this shift towards, again, maybe more. That's the positive world, let's say, where being a Christian has sort of a suite of benefits. It shifts more towards neutrality, and then sort of peak woke. It was you could lose practical career opportunities. It definitely locked you out of certain important cultural institutions. But I'm curious if you think that some of that is actually turning around, even in the past year or two. Like, would you say that? I get the sense that it's sort of maybe even think about the Charlie Kirk Memorial. Which of course, like a total tragedy, the event itself. But then at this memorial, how explicitly Christian it all was, even and from many of our most prominent leaders. Thinking about even the language of Rubio and Vance more politically, but I do sense even it's not just political figures; it's also some more cultural figures and such as well. So do you think maybe are we reversing from maybe negative world back to neutral or something like that? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I certainly think that there's something to the vibe shift.
Yeah,
a little bit. I certainly think some of the overt hostility has declined a little bit. Woke is clearly in retreat, and even like secular corporate America doesn't really want it. They're glad to be able to rein in their activist employees, not because they don't like diversity. They still like diversity, but they're like, we want to focus on business here, not politics. I think we're still looking at a period of structural decline of Christianity in America. So you can say Gen Z attendance is up. Even that's true. Its attendance is up of a much lower base. Baby boomers are much more religious than Gen Z. And so we're going to lose baby boomers, and we're going to have coming in much smaller cohorts. And so I think structural decline is sort of baked into the cake. a little bit. It's sort of like declining birth rates. It's going to get you. Like there's some demographics there. So I say that's kind of an element of it. I'd also say like we are like definitively in a post-Christian culture, I would say, which we see through many things. You know, the public wants abortion to be legal. That's the reality. If you look, it's been on the ballot. It's the pro-abortion position is won a majority of the votes every time it's been on the ballot. Even in an ultra-red state like Kentucky, they couldn't pass a vote to simply say that there's no constitutional right to an abortion in Kentucky. It wouldn't have banned abortion. It would have merely established that there was no constitutional right to it, but that failed. So that goes to show you the position. I think people by and large want gambling to be legal. I think they by and large want pot to be legal. I think they by and large want porn to be legal. I don't think I think that there's things they don't like and they might dial back this, that, or the other aspect of it. Oh, sports gambling starting to corrupt things. We better take care of that. Sort of like the smartphone. Oh, we went a little too far giving kids smartphones. Now we're going to dial it back. We're going to get them out of school, but we're not getting rid of smartphones. And so I kind of feel like that's how it is with some of this stuff. And I think the correction is somehow viewed as like the swing back to the conservative position. But like, just like Ronald Reagan did not get rid of no-fault divorce. In fact, he may have actually signed no-fault divorce, as I recall. But like, the Reagan Revolution did not undo the sexual revolution. You know, in a sense, it consolidated a lot of that stuff. And so my feeling is, like, if you think we're going to have like this we could have a massive religious revival, but realistically, cultural change is a very long-term, slow burn thing. And we've come so far to think that it's all going to reverse like that is, I think, wishful thinking.
All right. Well, thank you both. I actually want to give an opportunity for both of you. Well, first, I'll just say it's aaronrenn.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, aaronrenn.com. Go sign up.
Continue to read and follow Aaron. And then, Bobby, tell us a little bit, just as a sort of final closing here, about exactly what you're building and working on right now with the American Housing Corporation.
I have a startup that is building row homes designed for families, and we're putting them in cities and we're putting them in infill suburbs. So very excited to announce more when I can, but that's what we're building. And our team is 12 now and getting bigger, hopefully next year. So projects underway and excited for the future.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the New Founding Podcast. New Founding has become a rallying point for founders and investors who are taking serious bets in the face of a stagnant business culture. Our venture fund backs early-stage startups focused on critical civilizational problems. If you're interested in pitching your company or investing in our fund, check out newfounding.com/venture and follow the link to apply. You can also follow us on X @newfounding and @NAT Halberstadt, HALBERSTADT.